Ladies and gentlemen, Lenin. V. Lenin. You all know who Lenin is, don't you? Said this, quote, "Democracy is indispensable to socialism." And why is that, do you think? Well, it's simply this, ladies and gentlemen. They're calling this a democracy now. It is not, and never has been. It is a constitutional republic. A constitutional republic is where there is a balance of power. In the federal government, that balance consists of the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. In the election process, where we elect representatives to go and take care of business for the state in Washington, D.C., we elect representatives. Our founding fathers, however, set this country up so that senators are picked by the state and not elected by the people. This would make sure that our constitutional republic could not become a democracy and thus turning into an oppressive, dictatorial, socialist state. For they understood the process well. The first step into turning the United States into a democracy was taking the power of the state to choose its own senators away and put it in the hands of the electorate, or the people. Whenever people see that they can vote themselves whatever exists in the treasury, socialism quickly follows. For when people find out that they can vote themselves whatever they want, and that is exactly what is happening today, people voting themselves whatever they want, Congress voting themselves whatever it wants, everybody is moving this country more and more into socialism. With socialism, eventually becomes a dictatorship. With a dictatorship, always comes fascism in its various forms, or total and absolute control and ownership by the state of everybody and everything, and that is known as communism. Freedom disappears, ladies and gentlemen, when people become dependent upon the state, or upon a dictator, or upon a king, or a lord, or an emperor, or a baron, or a duke, or a duchess, for their very existence, for their job, for their clothing, for their food. When this happens, people, without even realizing it, have become enslaved. In the pursuit of laziness, and in the pursuit of the dull, getting something for nothing, which, folks, is a dream that never comes true. There is no such thing as something for nothing. You see, when you accept a benefit from a benefactor, you give away some of your rights, for the benefactor has the right to dictate the manner in which you use the benefit. For example, when you become a child to a father or a mother, the father and the mother have the right to dictate what time the child goes to bed, what time the child gets up, what the child has to eat, what kind of work the child does, if any, if the child homeschools, public, private, what religion the child is, whether the child can go out, what time they have to be home, whether the child can drive a car, whether the child can have a bicycle, whether the child gets any gifts at Christmas or any other time of the year for that matter. And when people become dependent upon the state, people become the child and the state becomes the father. And you had better understand that. That is why Lenin understood, and our founding fathers understood, that democracy is indispensable to socialism. Karl Marx, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, and he said this, quote, "Peace is the absence of all opposition to socialism." Let me say that again. Quote, "Peace is the absence of all opposition to socialism." End quote. I suppose it's worth noting that the United Nations military is called peacekeepers. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Karl Marx was a bitter failure at absolutely everything he ever tried? Have you ever really studied his life? Probably not. He was a bitter, absolute failure at every single thing he ever tried. Did you know that Karl Marx was a racist that hated Jews, blacks, and the common man? In particular, Slavs. Let me say that again. Karl Marx hated Jews, hated blacks, and hated the common man. I bet your Marxist professor didn't tell you that. Did you know that Karl Marx was nothing more or less than a stooge for a wealthy capitalist named Friedrich Engels? Did you know that socialism was created by the rich as the ultimate means of enslaving and controlling the masses, making them totally and completely dependent upon the state? If not, ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you not to read college textbooks, but read the actual dialogues between Marx and Engels. Forget the textbooks. They're lying to you. Always, if you want to know the truth, go to the source. Of course, wading through all these original books and texts and dialogues are very dry reading, and it takes a long time, and it is boring, and it feels like wading through a swamp of shit most of the time, because that's what it is, folks. Absolute shit. But if you want to know the truth, that's what you have to do. Those that have been teaching you the lies about socialism know that you will not do that, and in most cases, never even attempt it. Of course, before you start, I must tell you that you must have a brain and some rudimentary intelligence, something that socialists apparently lack. You see, modern-day socialists have perfected propaganda techniques to that the biggest lies are now regarded by the sheeple as absolute truths. For instance, let me take one very common big lie that the socialists have foisted upon the American people, and they have swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. You see, the concept of right versus left, with the socialists given that the left extreme is communism, which is good somehow. Left liberal, communism, socialism, good. And the right extreme is Nazi, bad. You see, this has happened through the repeated connection of Nazi with right, and not any basis, in fact, whatsoever. It is a deception of the greatest magnitude, for Nazi is not right, never was right, never will be right, pun absolutely intended. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, that any scale must measure two extremes, or it is not a scale. In effect, heavy versus light, black versus white, light versus darkness, fat versus thin, and so on. You see, the concept that a scale that measures left versus right has at its two extremes elements of total control and oppression is absolutely ludicrous, and one of the biggest lies that has been foisted upon the world. You see, the truth, ladies and gentlemen, the truth is that the scale at its extreme left is the absolute and total control and ownership of everything and everyone by the state. This is called communism. Versus, at the right extreme, the absence of any control of anything or anyone by anybody, and this is called anarchy. Between these two extremes are all the other forms of government and or control or absence of control, and somewhere near the middle is our constitutional republic. Didn't you ever wonder, ladies and gentlemen, how the socialist big lie made anarchists absolutely disappear from the equation? On the left was total control of communism, and on the right was total control of fascism under Nazis. What was anarchy supposed to be in the middle? Where our constitutional republic actually sits? Didn't you ever wonder about that? Or do you even wonder about anything anymore? Have you become so conditioned and so brainwashed that you'll accept anything that comes across the big eye, the propaganda machine in your living room, a big brother in your living room? You see, Nazi could never be on the right if on the left is socialism and communism. Nazi cannot, absolutely could never be on the right. For Nazi is simply gutter slang, ladies and gentlemen, for National Socialism. Nazi originated from the German National Socialist Workers' Party. See, Hitler was a socialist. Hitler nationalized almost everything. He had social programs for everyone under every circumstance. Hitler was engaged in a program of social engineering never before attempted by anyone or any government in the history of the world. Communism is also a manifestation of socialism. Nazi can only exist on the left, just above communism, which, by the way, exhibited more facets of fascism than the Nazis ever did, murdered more people than the Nazis did. But that does not mean that what the Nazis did was okay. It does not excuse what they did. I'm just trying to tell you the truth and expose the big lie under which you have been living for so many years. For all of these lies, taken together, are forcing you down on your knees, are propelling you over the cliff towards a death in a world of socialism where you will be enslaved in an endless system of debt forever. Where the ownership of private property is forbidden, and where the school in the community will be merged with the mental health center, and you will be required to attend, quite possibly for your entire life. Another socialist lie is that fascism is an expression of the right. However, ladies and gentlemen, when one studies history, it is found to have only existed in socialist regimes. Fascism is an expression of control which only exists on the left, because on the left side of the scale is where control lives. It only exists there. Although communists and socialists will vehemently deny it, fascism only reaches its full potential in a communist system of government, where literally everything is owned and controlled by the state, and the only thing that matters is the welfare of the state. The God is the state, the Father is the state, the provider is the state, and the executioner is the state. You see, the socialists want you to believe that freedom-loving Americans on the real right are Nazis, are fascists, are racist, and it's simply not true. And all these little idiots running around calling themselves Nazis and believing that they are on the right, and believing that they are for freedom, and believing that they support the Constitution of the United States of America, are not only lying to you, ladies and gentlemen, but are lying to themselves, which is the worst thing that any human being can ever do. They are nowhere near the center, much less the right. They are firmly on the left. firmly established in that foothold known as socialism, which breeds dictators, which breeds fascism. If you are a Nazi, or you think you are a Nazi, and you are hearing this for the first time, then you had better sit down and think about it. Because what I am telling you is the first truth that you have ever heard in your life. May I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that the Soviet Union has a history of persecuting Jews and other minorities. May I remind you that they have never seen a black man in the leadership of the Soviet Union, ever. May I remind you that the Soviet Union has always benefited its minority states last, when, and even if they are benefited at all. How do the socialists explain I'm talking about me and you, real Americans, how do they explain our resistance to more regulation and control? How do they explain so many people voting for the wrong candidate? How do they explain Donald Trump in the White House? How do these fools explain all the people demanding to keep their gun rights? They can't. They don't. And they won't. Because to do so will force them to admit that they are wrong and that we're not racist or bigots or terrorists. In fact, exactly the opposite is true. For what we want is to give the population of the world freedom, responsibility, and a sense of self-worth. What they want to bring into the world is, of course, the opposite, which is total and complete control over every single person upon the earth from birth until death, where you're shackled in a system of debt, where you cannot even own the simplest, most rudimentary weapon to defend your person and your property, which, by the way, you won't have none of, since private property will not be allowed to be owned. How can these people call themselves freedom-loving Americans when they call those who are sworn to protect and defend the Constitution for the United States of America racists, fascists, and terrorists, when in fact, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution is the only document in the history of the world that has ever set man and woman, including blacks, free. The Constitution is the government and the supreme law of this land. If we who are sworn to protect and defend that document, that government, that law, for the protection of all people, of all races, and all religions, are racist and fascist and terrorists, then what, pray tell, does that make them? At the very least, ladies and gentlemen, it makes them traitors and guilty of treason. They are agents of change for international socialism. I'm letting you think about that for a bit. Do you really have a grasp on what I am trying to teach you all tonight? And I know that all beliefs must be free will choice beliefs, or this whole process, this whole game is nothing but a joke. Therefore, you have your right, your personal choice, and anyone who truly understands freedom will grant that. Anyone who will not, does not, and has not ever understood truly what freedom really means, or what our founding fathers were really trying to give us and give to the world. They know nothing of freedom, care nothing of freedom, and will not ever allow you to have a free will choice about anything. With freedom comes a great deal of responsibility, personal responsibility. You are responsible for your actions, and I am responsible for mine. Which means if you decide to take a walk on a cold day along a sidewalk that you know is covered with a sheet of ice, and you slip and fall, how dare you sue the city? Change agents for international socialism do live among us, and we know that because we can see them. And they are in fact fascists. They are the real Nazis. Don't let the only truly free nation that this world has ever known turn into just another socialist nation, the world would instantly feel this impact, and there would be absolutely nothing in the way of bringing about a socialist, totalitarian world government where freedom will never be allowed to ever exist again. So choose your future wisely while you still can. Hope this gave you something to think about. Good night, folks.